Sounds like a cool place to see a concert. Thank you, Paris. And of course, stay right there because now it is time to dive in a little deeper to the politics behind unmasking and much more in tonight's Spotlight Politics. Joining us now are Heather Sharon and, of course, Paris. Thank you for not going anywhere. So let's start with the politics of Governor J.B. Pritzker lifting the indoor mask mandate starting February 28th. Here's what he said today about the change.
We're following the numbers that the CDC is putting out and recognizing that we're not there yet. And that's why February 28th is a goal. It's not today. We're announcing it today so people will know, businesses will know, when that date is coming. Our trajectory looks like we're going to be somewhere close to maybe where we were last summer.
So Paris, is Governor Pritzker's, change in the mask mandate, is this based on science or what some critics are calling political science?
Well, certainly politics. That question was brought up today with the governor, but the governor says it is truly based on the science, and he's saying by February 28th that the hospitalization rate will be well below what he believes, or he believes it'll be well below the rate that it was when that mask mandate was instituted back on August 30th. But you can't deny that he and other blue state governors have announced in the last couple days the rescinding of this mask mandate. Although the governor did say this announcement does not extend to schools or school children, and the reason for that is children are not vaccinated at very high rates right now. They're together in this space for several hours a day, and if you look at the state's own contact tracing data, schools are by far the #1 place in the state where COVID is contracted. So he said hopefully schools can lose their mask mandates a few weeks after that, although it's really confusing right now because of that court ruling last week. So it remains to be seen whether kids will still be wearing masks in schools over the next couple months.
Right, of course, because we know the governor has asked the attorney general to go ahead and start appealing that in the court and also asking for a stay of that TRO. So we know that GOP leader Jim Durkin wrote the governor a pointed letter about masking that said in part, quote, "Today I am dealing with irate parents scrambling for childcare to make it work, students being separated in school buildings, and no answers from your administration. Your lack of a plan has forced people to give up hope that they can ever have a normal life in Illinois." Not mincing words. Heather, did that play a role in Pritzker's change?
I don't think so. Pritzker was asked if he was, reacting sort of the criticism that he's gotten, but he said that he really wasn't, that he was following the science, and that so many critics of the mask mandate have also turned into people who have actively encouraged people not to get vaccinated. He said he just doesn't take it very seriously. I think it will be interesting to watch what happens in the city of Chicago. Of course, we all remembered from back in 2020 that cities and counties can put in stricter restrictions than the state. They can't put in looser restrictions. And Mayor Lori Lightfoot's office said in a statement today that she's hopeful that the city will also meet those metrics that the Governor Pritzker is excited about. But instead, she wants to make sure that the city is mostly at a lower rate of transmission. And right now, the city remains at a high rate of transmission. It's unclear whether the city will be able to complete 2 weeks at that lower level by February 28th. That would have to happen no later than Monday.
And going back, Brandis, to that letter from Durkin, remember, that was in response to a letter that House Speaker Chris Welch sent to Durkin saying, hey, some of your members are saying some wild things about a proposal here from one of our members on the Democratic side, State Representative Deb Conroy, who had proposed something that was taken wildly out of context. Someone had said she's proposing some kind of COVID detention camps, which is of course not true, but she had received some very harsh death threats, some very dangerous death threats, and in fact, a couple of members of the Democratic caucus had been receiving death threats in the last few days. So Welch wrote that letter to Durkin saying, watch the language among some of your members because it's really turning into some dangerous situations for some of our members.
And a lot of letter writing going on because I believe the governor responded to Durkin as well with his own letter calling out some members of the GOP for some of the information that they've been spreading. And in that letter, letting him know that he was going to make this announcement about February 28th. Paris, Durkin isn't the only Republican, though, who wants the mask mandate lifted. Long list of GOP candidates who want it gone as well.
Well, of course. I mean, every GOP candidate in the primary field running for governor have wanted it gone. They've called for the governor to rescind the mandate. They've been against mandates. And today, they're saying that finally the governor is listening to them, although I'm sure to their liking it's not going to happen soon enough. But getting back to that politics question, Brandis, the science and the politics are kind of colliding for Governor Pritzker here as the Omicron variant wanes. I'm sure Governor Pritzker does not want to have to deal with the question of mask mandates, vaccine mandates, shutdowns as the election really ramps up, which is going to be closer to the spring. The primary, of course, is in June, and then the general is going to be for the 5 months after that. So if Omicron really is waning and there is no other variant coming in, I'm sure Pritzker is breathing a huge sigh of relief that he's not going to have to deal with this as a campaign issue from candidates like Darren Bailey, the downstate senator, who's made this his whole cause of running, challenging Pritzker in court on these mandates. So it's maybe one less thing that he'll have to worry about. But as the epidemiologist said earlier, we just don't know what's going to happen.
And Heather, before we move on, the vaccine mandate deadline for city workers was January 31st. What's happening with firefighters and police who are not complying?
Well, it's really two separate issues. We believe that the city has begun notifying members of every union who are not fully vaccinated at this point, who are not members of the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 7. Their challenge to the mayor's vaccine mandate remains in arbitration. We haven't gotten a decision in that ruling, but every other unionized city employee had until January 31st to be fully vaccinated and are now at risk of termination. So that will be a very important question as we go forward in the next week or so to see exactly how many city employees will lose their job because they're not fully vaccinated.
So a busy week in Chicago courtrooms for politicians and their attorneys, as Heather pointed out on Twitter. Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson on trial for in federal court. His lawyers are arguing that, he's just sort of sloppy and forgetful, bit of a hot mess. Prosecutors say, hot mess or not, lying on your taxes is still a crime. Paris, is that a strong defense?
It's not really a defense that I've ever really heard, and it's not as if the prosecutors, just like you said, or the defense, they're not even saying that mortgage interest deduction that he took for a loan that wasn't actually a mortgage. They're not even saying he didn't do that. They're just saying he can't keep his papers straight. He walks to the mailbox on, tax filing day. His desk is all strewn and tattered with papers. I don't know if that's a defense that a jury's going to buy, but it is very notable that Alderman Thompson has taken this all the way to trial. As we know, the family that he comes from, the Daley family, the son of a long-term mayor, the nephew of a long-term mayor, and the grandson of another long-term mayor. So it's certainly an unorthodox defense. They're not claiming some kind of, no, he properly claimed his tax deduction. They're just saying that he's a mess. But he's also, he's a working lawyer. He's a working alderman. I think the constituents of the 11th Ward don't want to hear that their alderman can't keep papers and numbers straight.
And they expect that he should be held to a higher standard when it comes to this stuff. Heather, the first Daley to face federal charges. Can he survive this trial politically, even if he is acquitted?
Well, that is a really good question. And I would tell you that Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson was in the fight of his political life even before he was charged criminally. There's a strong movement to create Chicago's first ward where a majority of the voters would be Asian American. And to do that, the two maps that we've talked so much about that are sort of dueling, pretty much the one thing they agree on is the creation of that Asian American ward centered around Chinatown. To do that, though, it will carve up the 11th Ward, which of course is the heart of the old Daley empire. And it will make it very difficult that if Alderman Daley Thompson is acquitted and he runs for re-election, it's going to be very difficult for him to win re-election in a ward like that. And he has vociferously opposed this plan, calling it racist to make decisions based on race, whereas Asian American groups have said that they see this as a matter of fairness because Chicago's Asian American population has grown by nearly 30% in the last decade. So he's in a lot of trouble on many different fronts.
So another sitting alderman's case also went before a judge this week. Alderman Ed Burke's lawyers say secret government recordings should not be allowed. Paris, briefly remind us about this case.
14 counts, bribery, racketeering, conspiracy, allegedly all surrounding Burke, trying to get business for his property tax appeal law firm, Clafter & Burke, from places like the redevelopers of the Old Main Post Office, a Burger King in his ward. There's another allegation in Portage Park, and then the Field Museum. And there's been voluminous pretrial motions. This feels like Burke was first, charged years ago. And Burke's attorneys are arguing that, the main piece of evidence here, these wiretap recordings from former Alderman Danny Solis, well, we don't think those should be admitted because Solis was in all kinds of legal hot water of his own. He struck this deal with the government. He'd do whatever the government said. And essentially, he kind of went in and trapped Burke in their minds. So this key smoking gun piece of evidence that they have, the Burke lawyers are trying to say, you got to get rid of that. I don't know that a judge is going to rule in favor of that, and I really don't know when this trial is actually going to get going in earnest, because even the judge is saying, he's never seen such a stack of pretrial motions and hearings that he has to go through.
So I want to move on to the city's violence. During an announcement about staffing the city's carjacking task force 24 hours a day, Mayor Lori Lightfoot attributed the rise in carjackings to remote learning. Take a look.
A lot of parents went to work during the day thinking their teenagers were logged on for remote learning, only to find something else. And I asked, is there some new market for stolen cars? And unfortunately, the answer was no, that for many of these kids, some of whom had no prior involvement in the criminal justice system, this was pure boredom.
Chicago Teachers Union was not a fan of those comments, demanding the mayor immediately apologize. Heather, did Mayor Lightfoot step on her own good news here?
Well, it certainly shifted the conversation, and unfortunately, I don't think it was accurate. The city's own crime data shows that the surge in carjackings began months before the pandemic hit and months before remote learning was even a glimmer in any of our eyes. So I don't think that there is a causation there, and I don't think there's really enough evidence to say, as the mayor did, that there's a correlation there. But of course, this sort of goes to the heart of her argument with the Chicago Teachers Union, and it's what led to the work stoppage in January, where teachers wanted to teach remotely when Omicron was surging with COVID-19 and the mayor refused. But it really sort of took that focus off what the mayor was trying to say. Look, we're making progress on stopping carjacking. We're staffing up. We're taking it very seriously. And as we've talked about the pressure that Governor Pritzker is under and other elected officials, the mayor also faces that pressure too, because she's not up for re-election in 2022, but she's up for re-election if she runs again in February 2023, and that's not too long away.
Can I jump in there, Heather? And I agree with you. The data is not there to really make this causation or correlation between remote learning and carjacking. And that's not the first time I've heard this. I mean, I've heard from juvenile judges, I've heard from prosecutors who have said the same thing, that some kids that get caught up in carjacking or other types of felonies or misdemeanors, the judge will ask the kid, are you in school right now? Are you doing remote learning? The kid will say no. And it's true that CPS did lose track of thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of kids last year. So you're right that we can't make that conclusion because we don't have data that makes that. But Mayor Lightfoot is echoing things that have been said out there.
So also, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul also up for re-election, proposing a law that will help prosecute retail theft rings. Heather, the law was proposed just as Chicago police arrested one alleged ringleader who reportedly dumped stolen cash registers on Pritzker's block. Something else to unpack another time. How much political peril are both the governor and the attorney general in the upcoming election? In about 40 seconds.
Well, there's no doubt that the Republican slate of statewide candidates are going to try to tag Governor Pritzker and Attorney General Raoul as soft on crime. And this is sort of a counteroffensive trying to get in front of that, to blunt that criticism, which can be very damaging because everybody's concerned about crime.
Okay, campaign issue that we'll be talking about a lot more going forward, I'm sure. Heather Sharon, Paris Schutz, that's Spotlight Politics. Thank you.